This is CNN Breaking News.
Breaking news here on CNN. I have something else for you now. We are now learning from a senior administration official that the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Susan Rice, has now withdrawn her name for nomination for the U.S. Secretary of State cabinet post. You know the story. She has very much so been under fire in really the weeks since September 11th of this year in the aftermath of the attacks on the consulate in Benghazi in Libya that killed the ambassador there and several others. So she's come under fire because of the administration's response. We've seen in recent weeks many veteran senators very critical of her, including Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham, and they will have much, much more on the Situation Room, of course, as this news is just coming out. What this means, of course, let me get to the statement here. Statement from the White House, quote, "I spoke to Ambassador Rice and accepted her decision to remove her name," this is the president, remove her name from consideration for Secretary of State. Goes on, "For 2 decades, Susan has proven to be an extraordinarily capable, patriotic, and passionate public servant. As my ambassador to the United Nations, she plays an indispensable role in advancing America's interests. Already, she has secured international support for sanctions against Iran and North Korea, worked to protect the people of Libya, helped achieve an independent South Sudan, stood up for Israel's security and legitimacy, and served as an advocate for UN reform and the human rights of all people." Just goes on to say he's very grateful that she will continue to serve as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. But, you know, it's been sort of widely known that Susan Rice has been the president's top pick for this post. So with her withdrawing her nomination, what does that mean? Who else, what other names might float to the top of that list? A lot of valid questions as people will start mulling this over, of course, in the coming days, as there are now changes coming within the president's cabinet for these next 4 years. Again, Wolf Blitzer will have much more on the Situation Room at the top of the hour. We will be right back.
This is CNN Breaking News.
I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room, and we have breaking news. Susan Rice, the United States ambassador to the United Nations, has written to the president saying she is withdrawing her name for consideration as the next Secretary of State to succeed Hillary Clinton. The president has now written back saying he has accepted her decision reluctantly. Our chief White House correspondent Jessica Yellen is joining us with more details. Jessica, all of a sudden, no more Susan Rice potentially as Secretary of State.
That's right, Wolf, and this clears the way for the president to now move forward and pick his national security team with far less conflict than might otherwise be the case. You know, if he was going to name Ambassador Rice to that post, he would have found a very tricky confirmation indeed. In a statement the president released, he said in part, quote, "Today, I spoke to Ambassador Susan Rice and accepted her decision to remove her name from consideration for Secretary of State. While I deeply regret the unfair and misleading attacks on Susan Rice in recent weeks, her decision demonstrates the strength of her character and an admirable commitment to rise above the politics of the moment to put our national interests first. The American people can be proud to have a public servant of her caliber and character representing our country." Wolf, as you know, Susan Rice has been caught up in this drama over the Benghazi conflict and the deaths of Americans in the assault on the U.S. consulate there. While Susan Rice was not responsible for security of the consulate, she did go on Sunday shows and talk about the U.S. response there. And she has been accused of deliberately mischaracterizing what happened. All sides, or the White House has adamantly insisted, and she has insisted, that she in no way deliberately mischaracterized what happened. She was reading from unclassified talking points, but nonetheless, this has been caught up in a back and forth. And Wolf, if I may, I'm going to read from part of her statement, her letter, I should say, to the president. What she wrote to the president says in part that, quote, "I am now convinced that the confirmation process would be lengthy, disruptive, and costly to you and to our most pressing national and international priorities. That trade-off is simply not worth it to our country." She also goes on to say the position of Secretary of State should never be politicized. Somewhere else in the letter, Wolf, she points out and says, I look forward to building on progress in your second term, which seems to leave the door open to the possibility she could serve in the administration in the second term. And according to my sources, there has been some talk of Ambassador Rice serving in the White House in the capacity as the president's director of national security. Now, that's a position that does not require Senate confirmation, and so she could possibly enter that role without the kind of conflict that would be involved in a confirmation hearing. This also opens the door for the possibility that Senator Kerry, now chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, could get the nod for Secretary of State, perhaps as early as next week, Wolf.
It does look like John Kerry now is certainly the front runner to be the next Secretary of State. He's the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's made no secret that he would like to be the Secretary of State, even though there has been some speculation maybe he could be the Secretary of Defense, although I think his preference has always been Secretary of State. The president needs to put together his new national security team in the coming days in order to get confirmation of all of these individuals in January so they can get going by the time he's sworn in for his second term on January 20th. Right now, John Kerry, if he becomes the nominee to become Secretary of State, there's also speculation that Chuck Hagel, the former senator from Nebraska, Republican, could be nominated to become Secretary of Defense. A lot of speculation about the CIA director. That position is open right now. And a lot of speculation about the Secretary of the Treasury, who has a lot of national security responsibilities as well. What are you hearing?
Well, it's my understanding that Senator Kerry is the odds-on favorite to be Secretary of State, that he has told people that he does not want to be Secretary of Defense, but that's a sort of a non-issue right now with this, with Susan Rice clearing the way. So this could allow Senator Kerry to get the nod for state. Senator Chuck Hagel, as you say, a Republican, is the president's, according to my sources, odds-on favorite to become Secretary of Defense. Gloria Borger has been reporting that as well. Senator Hagel is well liked by the president. He is seen as a team player by the president. He is also seen as a statesman who doesn't claim too much credit, can get things done. But he does have some challenges and would no doubt have some issues in confirmation because pro-Israel groups object to some of the positions he's taken in the past, opposing Iran sanctions in the past, not recognizing Hezbollah as a terrorist group, other issues. So that would create some sticky situations. And then there's a question of CIA. The big question has always been whether John Brennan, currently the director of Homeland Security, wants that job. The way it's been put to me by some is it's his if he wants it. The question is, does he? Otherwise, acting director Morell could keep it. But all of this, Wolf, makes much neater picture now that Susan Rice has issued this letter, and the president could perhaps make all these announcements next week.
All right, stand by for a moment, Jessica. Jill Doherty is our State Department correspondent who's watching what's going on. So it looks potentially, Jill, like John Kerry could be the man you'll be covering in the weeks and months, maybe years to come. John Kerry, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, the Democratic presidential nominee back in 2004. What are you hearing?
Well, Wolf, obviously, now that Susan Rice is out of the picture, it would be very logical to turn to him. He is well known for international affairs, every type of issue. He seems to have a statement ready within seconds. He's a heavyweight. He knows all the issues, and he wouldn't have a difficulty, it would appear, in the Senate for being confirmed for that post, as some other people, obviously Susan Rice, would have. And it also clears the way, I think, now for Secretary Clinton to move on to her next venture, because don't forget that she was saying she would stay at the State Department until that process of getting somebody in her place was over. And now, if it's a smoother sailing, then she could leave after the inauguration, and that could be a lot easier for her. And then the other thing on the timing, Wolf, is don't forget next week we're expecting that this accountability review board on Benghazi, on which Susan Rice made those comments, is going to be coming out. We expect that it will be coming out next week. Secretary Clinton will be testifying up on the Hill, both to the Senate and to the House. And so there's a lot of tight timing on this, but it could be very, very interesting, because don't forget what brought her down, of course, was the criticism about Benghazi. And next week, The Accountability Review Board is that investigative body that the State Department puts together. It will be reporting directly to Secretary Clinton, and then Secretary Clinton briefs the Congress. So we will know a lot more about Benghazi, presumably next week.
Secretary Clinton scheduled to testify before Congress on December 20th in that accountability board led by the retired U.S. Ambassador Thomas Pickering, a very distinguished group of individuals reviewing what happened. I want everyone to stand by. Jill Doherty over at the State Department, Jessica Yellen at the White House. Let's go to Dana Bash. She's up on Capitol Hill. What are you hearing up there?
Well, not a lot of surprise, Wolf. The fact of the matter is that Susan Rice did not do herself any favors in the meetings that she had a couple of weeks ago, which we covered intensely. The meeting she had with John McCain and Lindsey Graham, her chief foes here. But more importantly, the meeting that she had with some people who were kind of on the fence, like Susan Collins, the moderate Republican from Maine. By all accounts, I talked to somebody who was very well versed in that meeting, said that it did not go well at all, that instead of answering what the senator thought were pretty mundane questions, Susan Rice got very defensive. And the feeling by Susan Collins and others after those meetings is if she can't deal with United States senators who are, kind of fellow Americans, so to speak, how is she going to be on the world stage when she's dealing with some of the world's foes? And so that was a big concern here. It certainly was political as well, but that was a big concern from those senators who were not as political. There's a lot of respect for her intellect here. People think she's very, very smart, that she knows the issues, but there is some concern, not just from Republicans, but also Democrats I talked to, about her personality, whether she had the personality to be the Secretary of State and to represent the U.S. on the world stage.
No statements, I take it, yet from either Senator McCain or Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Ayotte, any of those who were so strongly critical of her? No statement at all. I would expect that we're going to get something relatively soon. From the beginning, as soon as Susan Rice's name even, was floated a little bit, Senator Graham especially told me in the hallway that there was no way he was going to let her nomination go forward. And as you heard Jessica report from the White House statement, the president made a point of noting that he was very unhappy with what he called the distortions of Susan Rice, particularly on her record of Benghazi. But it is important to note that Benghazi was the flashpoint that might have taken her nomination down before it even started. But it was beyond that. It was also just the feeling that she was maybe too political and maybe better to be the national security advisor, as Jessica reported, because that's more political inherently and because she doesn't need Senate confirmation. All right, stand by. Everyone stand by. Our chief political analyst, Gloria Borger, is here in the Situation Room watching what's going on as well. We were bracing for an announcement of a new national security team next week. We didn't know if the president was going to dig down and fight aggressively for Susan Rice. By writing this letter to the president, she has withdrawn her name.
Yeah, I just spoke with a source close to the White House since this news had been revealed, and he was not really surprised, Wolf, like Dana was reporting from Capitol Hill. Senators there not very much surprised, because the sense was the longer that the nomination sort of hung out there, or the potential for the nomination hung out there, the more difficult a slog the White House recognized that it actually had. And so I think that this one source said to me, look, I think they underestimated the importance of the club, and also really came to understand the difficulty that she had when she went up to visit those senators on the Hill, as Dana was talking about, particularly Susan Collins, who would have been a natural ally, and instead came out of that session with more questions than answers on Benghazi, and that was a very, very bad sign for her.
Once Susan Collins made those comments, she had introduced Susan Rice when she was being considered for the United States ambassador to the United Nations. We just got a statement in from Senator McCain on the Susan Rice announcement. I'll read it to our viewers. Senator McCain thanks Ambassador Rice for her service to the country and wishes her well. He will continue to seek all the facts surrounding the attack on our consulate in Benghazi that killed 4 brave Americans. A terse, short statement from Senator McCain. Basically, I assume he's fairly relieved that this is over with, and if John Kerry is the nominee, I think there's no doubt he will support John Kerry's nomination.
That's right. And I don't think anyone would want to say John McCain single-handedly brought down Susan Rice, because I think there were lots of senators as she made her visits to the Hill, and as Dana points out, not only on the Republican side, but also some Democrats who had questions about Benghazi. No doubt John McCain would have led the charge, but I don't think the president would have been swayed one way or another by a single senator. But clearly, John McCain will support John Kerry if he is indeed nominated, and that seems more and more likely to be the case.
And yesterday you reported that Chuck Hagel, the former Nebraska senator, a Republican, was emerging as the front runner, supposedly, to be the next Secretary of Defense. What are you hearing today?
I think it's still the case, and probably more so at this point. We know that Chuck Hagel, a Republican, has met with the president, met with the vice president. This doesn't mean it's going to be easy for Chuck Hagel, Wolf. He believes in soft power. He didn't early on in the 2000s believe in Iranian sanctions. So there may be a problem with the Israel lobby. At one point in his career, he believed in talking to Hamas, for example. But this is somebody who has been very involved, continued to be involved in foreign policy, on the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, somebody well-respected inside the administration. And remember, he crossed party lines, Wolf, to support Barack Obama when he first ran for the presidency in the 2008 campaign.
Now, let me just read the statement that Lindsey Graham just released. Put it up on the screen if we have it for our viewers. If not, I'll just read it. I respect Ambassador Rice's decision. President Obama has many talented people to choose from to serve as our next Secretary of State. When it comes to Benghazi, I am determined to find out what happened before, during, and after the attack. Unfortunately, the White House and other agencies are stonewalling when it comes to providing the relevant information. I find this unacceptable. Lindsey Graham adds, the story of Benghazi is a story of national security failure, and we must work to prevent it from ever happening again. I will continue working diligently to get to the bottom of what happened in Benghazi. So we've now heard from Senator McCain. We've now heard from Lindsey Graham. We'll be hearing from many more.
And the question on Benghazi might also affect the question of who leads the CIA, for example. I know Jessica was talking about that earlier, because the question is whether the deputy director becomes tarnished because of the CIA role in Benghazi, or not disclosing information on what had actually occurred.
Yeah, he's got to put together a national security team, a Secretary of State, a Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Treasury. He's got to get a new CIA director. Maybe he'll want to get a new national security advisor. If Tom Donilon wants to do something else. So there's a lot of issues on the president's plate right now beyond the fiscal cliff. Stand by, Gloria, for that. We're getting new information on why Susan Rice, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, made this dramatic decision today. Stand by, much more on the breaking news right after this.